In the summer of 1944, as Allied armies pushed deeper into Nazi-occupied Europe, a secret unit was mobilized. Not soldiers with rifles, not generals with battle plans, but artists, sound engineers, and illusion experts. Their mission? To deceive an entire German army. Their weapon? Imagination. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the Ghost Army. The unit that fought without firing a shot. That won battles with rubber tanks and amplified sound. That saved thousands of lives through pure psychological warfare. For decades, their story remained classified, buried in military archives, forgotten by history. Until now. But how did such an extraordinary unit come to exist? How did the military come to recruit artists instead of soldiers? The answer lies in one of World War II's most critical strategic dilemmas. By mid-1944, the Allied advance had stalled. The German army was defeated on paper, but not in reality. The Wehrmacht still controlled vast territories. German forces still fought with discipline and ferocity. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery faced a critical shortage. A shortage that would have catastrophic consequences if left unsolved. He had far fewer troops than needed to hold the Rhine frontier and push into Germany. Every soldier counted. Every division was desperately needed elsewhere. But Montgomery had a problem that no amount of traditional military solutions could solve. Large sections of the front line needed to be defended with forces he simply didn't have. The solution was audacious, radical. It violated every principle of conventional military thinking. Instead of deploying real soldiers, deploy the illusion of soldiers. Thousands of them. Enough to convince German intelligence that entire armies were positioned where only a handful of men actually stood. Enough to make German high command respond to phantom threats. Enough to fundamentally alter the course of the war. Enter Colonel Harry L. Reese and a young captain named Fred Fox. They were tasked with creating an entirely new kind of unit. Not infantry. Not artillery. But something the military had never seen before. A tactical deception company designed to wage psychological warfare on an unprecedented scale. The Army called it the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. History would know it as the Ghost Army. A unit so secret, so unconventional, that it would remain classified for nearly 50 years after the war. A unit whose soldiers were not trained killers, but artists. The 23rd wasn't built with career soldiers. It wasn't built with West Point graduates or hardened combat veterans. It was built with misfits. Brilliant misfits. Creative misfits. The military sent recruitment officers to art schools across America with an unusual request. Find us your best painters, your best sculptors, your best cartoonists, your best advertising executives, your best sound engineers. Find us men who have spent their lives creating illusions. Because we need them to create the ultimate illusion. The illusion of an army. Men who understood form and space and visual perspective. Men who understood how to manipulate perception. Men who understood that reality is often less important than what people believe to be real. One recruit was a young artist named Bill Sales. Another was a cartoonist from Warner Brothers. An advertising executive from Madison Avenue. A sculptor from an art school. Men in their 20s and 30s who had never thrown a grenade, never fired a rifle in combat, never shed blood in anger. Yet they were about to fool the most battle-hardened military machine in the world. The unit grew to approximately 1,100 soldiers. but only around 300 were actual combat troops trained in conventional warfare. The rest were specialists, artists, engineers, radio operators, sound technicians, electricians, men whose expertise lay not in killing, but in creating. They trained in a compound in England, learning techniques that had never been used in warfare before. Their instructors taught them not how to fight, but how to deceive, how to manipulate German perception, how to make the enemy believe what they saw, heard, and thought they understood was real. The 23 RD's motto became, "We sure put on a show." They had no idea how literal that would become. They had no idea that their show would determine the fate of thousands of soldiers. That their creative genius would save more lives than bullets and bombs. That their art would become the most lethal weapon in their arsenal. The 23 RD's arsenal was unlike anything in military history. Inflatable rubber tanks, life-sized replicas so realistic that from the air, they appeared indistinguishable from real armor. Inflatable trucks, inflatable artillery pieces, all designed to fool German reconnaissance aircraft and spies. But the tanks weren't the real weapon. The real weapon was sound. The unit had state-of-the-art portable sound equipment, amplifiers, and speakers that could broadcast the noise of an entire mechanized army across miles of terrain. Tank engines, artillery fire, troop movements, shouted orders, the cacophony of war itself. German intelligence relied heavily on sound detection and acoustic reconnaissance. If the Ghost Army could make it sound like thousands of soldiers were moving across terrain, if they could create the acoustic signature of an entire mechanized division, German intelligence would have to believe it. They would have to report it to High Command, and German High Command would have to respond. They would move real troops to counter a phantom threat. They would commit reserves to defend against armies that didn't exist. They would make strategic decisions based on false intelligence. In essence, the Ghost Army was waging war not with bullets, but with belief. Not with force, but with psychological manipulation. It was warfare in its purest, most elegant form. The unit also had teams of radio operators who transmitted fake military communications, encrypted messages that German intelligence would intercept and analyze. False orders, false unit designations, false troop movements, all designed to paint a comprehensive picture of overwhelming Allied strength in areas where only a handful of men actually stood. It was psychological warfare at an industrial scale. The Ghost Army's entire arsenal was designed to create belief in the mind of the enemy, to make German commanders see what wasn't there, to make them hear what they weren't prepared to hear, to make them believe lies more compelling than truth. In June 1944, just days after D-Day, the 23rd deployed to Normandy. Their first mission was to deceive German forces about the location and strength of Allied positions. Using their inflatable tanks and sound equipment, they created the illusion of entire divisions. German reconnaissance reported massive tank concentrations in areas where the Ghost Army had positioned rubber replicas. German commanders made decisions based on false intelligence. Real troops were diverted to meet phantom threats. Real soldiers were pulled away from critical positions to defend against armies that existed only in German intelligence reports. The Ghost Army's deception operations saved lives. Countless lives by convincing German high command that Allied forces were stronger and more numerous than they actually were. The unit prevented German counterattacks that could have turned the tide in Normandy. German reserves remained committed to defending against phantom threats. German divisions stayed in place to meet imaginary enemies. And real Allied soldiers lived because of rubber tanks and amplified sound. But the real test was still to come. The Ghost Army's success in Normandy was just the beginning. Their innovations in deception were proven. Their techniques were refined. And they were about to play an even bigger role in one of World War II's most critical operations. The Rhine crossing would be their masterpiece. The operation that would determine the fate of the European war. By March 1945, the Allies were preparing to cross the Rhine, the last major natural barrier before the heart of Germany. This was the Rhine that had protected Germany for centuries. This was the Rhine that German generals believed was impregnable. This was the Rhine that stood between the Allies and victory. Field Marshal Montgomery was orchestrating what would be the largest river crossing since D-Day. Thousands of troops, massive artillery barrages, amphibious assault craft, naval support, air cover, every resource Montgomery could muster. But there was a critical problem. The Germans still had significant forces defending the Rhine. They knew the crossing was coming. They were fortified. They were entrenched. They were ready to fight. Montgomery needed a solution. He needed to buy time. He needed to stretch German resources thin across a wider front. He needed to convince German high command that the main crossing would happen in a completely different location. A location where German defenses were weakest. A location where German reserves were far away. A location called Dusseldorf. Enter the Ghost Army for the final time. For Operation Lumberjack, the 23 RD's mission was to create a massive deception, one of the largest psychological operations ever attempted in warfare. They had to make German intelligence believe that the primary Allied crossing would occur at Dusseldorf, miles away from the actual crossing points at Remagen and Oppenheim. The Ghost Army moved into position. Inflatable tanks were deployed across the Dusseldorf sector. Sound equipment was set up and calibrated. Radio operators began transmitting false military communications. The unit created the appearance of massive Allied forces massing for an assault. An entire army ready to cross the Rhine at Dusseldorf. An entire army that existed only in the minds of German